Would you believe that the US is experiencing the most brutal internal mass migration in modern history? Just look at this blood-red distribution map. Crowds are frantically fleeing to the West Coast and the gold mine of the Texas Triangle. The reason? Warm climate, low taxes, and explosive opportunities. The gravitational pull of the Sunbelt is draining the lifeblood out of the rest of the country. Look closely at the 5 core boroughs. The population chart plummets like a shattered glass wall. Welcome to the era of decline. 630,000 people vanished, wiping out 90% of a decade's worth of growth in the blink of an eye. The knockout punch was the global health crisis. Over 500,000 residents evaporated from this mega. Rock bottom, a dark historical record for the state that was once the beating heart of America. Field hospital tents littered the parks. A desolate scene straight out of a post-apocalyptic movie. The twist: not long ago, beneath the dome of the Capitol, New York lawmakers held the ultimate power to dictate the nation's fate. The Brooklyn Bridge proudly witnessed this absolute peak. The congressional seat chart is the ultimate measure of absolute power. They used to hold it all, but what goes up must come down. The rise of the Sunbelt states completely flipped the geopolitical chessboard. Seat by seat in the House slipped from their grasp. The power chart took a nosedive. History is repeating itself ruthlessly. At the crowded train stations right now, the forecast for the future is nothing but departures. With no return tickets, is there a way out for the empire? California rose up to snatch the crown, leaving the proud shadow of the Golden Gate Bridge to eclipse the old empire. Sliding down to 4th place, New York bitterly watches Texas and Florida boldly overtake it on the map of power. The peak of the illusion was set in 2020. Even though growth had been slowing for a long time, few expected that to be the watershed moment, the life or death boundary before the bubble burst. But looking inward, the truth is even more brutal. There are no natural borders dividing them, but the cultural and geographic divides cut deep like knives. The density map exposes a terrifying paradox. In Brooklyn, millions of people are packed like sardines on islands. The tiny island of Manhattan has to bear the weight of more than half the state's population. How long do you think this compression can last before it explodes? Carrying 2/3 of the population but owning a mere 4% of the land area. Meanwhile, the vast north, taking up the lion's share of the territory, sits desolate with only a third of the residents. A total suffocation of living space. The cramped downstate reveals an extreme wealth gap. Wealth is hoarded in the South, ruthlessly leaving the sparsely populated, impoverished upstate behind. The sound of tractors plowing the northern farmlands starkly contrasts with the bustling streets and abundant jobs of the financial hub. Same state, but to parallel, entirely alien worlds. Looking back, the opening of the Erie Canal created a golden age. Clearing the arteries of the Great Lakes, the waterway connecting to the Atlantic crushed transportation costs. Whoever controls the water controls America. Fleets of ships rumbling through the locks, this absolute advantage put New York on top of the world. It activated the vitality of the whole region, turning the riverside cities into massive, tireless money-printing machines. America's first waterway superhighway saw thousands of cargo ships navigating day and night. The channels were constantly upgraded, before gradually yielding the stage to the proud whistle of steam trains stretching their tentacles across the continent. Giant factories sprang up like mushrooms, seizing the core of global manufacturing. That golden era beckoned massive waves of settlers carrying the American dream. But every throne eventually falls. The spiral of doom, in fact, has only just begun. At that time, Buffalo's massive scale was so brilliant it rivaled the entirety of bustling Queens. Who could have guessed that glory was so fragile? The brutal turning point struck. The St. Lawrence Seaway officially opened, ruthlessly closing New York's era of monopoly. When the full St. Lawrence route opened with its massive freight capacity, it instantly became the giant that swallowed all the maritime advantages of the old empire. The interstate highway network spread across America. The legendary Erie Canal, officially flatlined. A great legacy faded away without a sound. The curtain closed on Erie. The cities that once printed money along the river now sank into a seemingly endless era of stagnation. The exodus began. A massive workforce packed up and left, ignoring all desperate attempts from the downtown service industry to keep them. Every population chart abruptly stalled, lost its breath, and then nosedived into a bottomless slide for decades to come. A wave of factory closures drained the lifeblood and the jobs. The consequence? Nearly half the region's population evaporated like they never existed. A great divergence erupted. The exhausted flocked to the south, looking to survive, while the ambitious crammed into NYC, chasing the glamorous American dream. But beneath that flashy veneer of recovery, a stealthy, deadly shift was waiting to detonate. Despite a few minor ripples of population recovery, the core decline continued to silently gnaw at the foundations of this megacity. The dark cloud of negative growth slowly enveloped it. The space for development shrank to a suffocating point. And then, the 2020 milestone hit. The pandemic erupted, locking down every exit and cementing the population at death's door. From the faint first cases, New York's massive hospital system quickly collapsed. The ticking time bomb officially detonated. The lockdowns ended, but the scars remained. The streets were empty, cold, and hauntingly devoid of life. It was a devastating blow, ruthlessly cutting deep into the already scratched history of a dying city gasping for air. Unemployment rates skyrocketed to unimaginable levels, accompanied by massive casualty numbers that shocked the world. Shattered livelihoods dragged the birth rate to rock bottom. The only choice left for the people: flee New York at any cost. The remote work era became the fatal stab. The population, bleeding, entered an irreversible stage. Why break your back paying exorbitant rent just to hang on? They left in droves, because now, sitting in the suburbs, you can easily pocket a sky-high East Coast salary. But the true twist of fate lies with the ultra-rich. When the elite withdraw their capital and the massive tax revenues leave with them, New York truly bleeds to the marrow. You think only the ultra-rich are terrified of high taxes? Think again. The crux of the matter is that even the seniors who dedicated their youth are being uprooted from the area that was once a bustling core. Where is the destination for this twilight exodus? Most move to Florida, where the warm climate beckons. But the juiciest bait is the tax-free retirement policy, turning it into a perfect retirement paradise that thoroughly defeats New York. Leaving Nye is no longer a choice. It's a getaway for survival. The crushing pressure of living costs skyrockets, while exorbitant housing prices strangle any dream of settling down in the glamorous city. A recent official report exposes a bitter reality. Rent is skyrocketing, surpassing the national average. Staying in New York means you aren't paying for living space. You're paying a ransom. With incomes devoured by housing, New York proudly ranks 5th nationwide in severity. This burden is so massive that buying a house is like trying to reach the stars. In other cities, 10 years of grinding gets you a home. But here, the threshold is absurdly high. The average rent has blown away all hopes of wealth accumulation for the younger generation. Try evaluating the standard of living through a financial lens. Based on standard spending models, the ideal salary for a single person to survive in this city. Hearing it will make you want to pack your bags immediately. You have to squeeze your budget until you're exhausted, even if your pre-tax salary sounds impressive. So, what kind of astronomical income would a family of 4 need just to avoid being kicked to the curb? Almost no one has a dime to spare when rent takes more than half their paycheck. The crushing pressure waking up every morning pushes them to escape, seeking a cheaper breathing space down south. And then, who will be the first to pack their bags? It's the working class and the middle class, leaving in bitterness. This invisible purge has ripped society apart, pushing inequality to red alert levels. Do you know where the root cause of this tragedy lies? It's the brutal imbalance of supply and demand. Job growth constantly attracts people, but the housing supply is pathetically bottom. The squeeze on living space, combined with various inflationary factors, joined forces to ruthlessly push real estate prices through the stratosphere. The game is now only for those with cash. Don't be too quick to blame the rich. When bank interest rates choke the market and Manhattan's land bank is depleted to the last inch, what other choice do developers have? They are forced to build ultra-luxury towers to offset soaring costs, ruthlessly crossing the working class out of the real estate game. Just look at Texas, a stinging slap to the pride of the East Coast. No need for glitz. Abundant land and loose regulations mean the new housing supply in a single core Texas city sometimes exceeds the total supply of the entire state of New York combined. Ah, the irony of numbers. The inequality bomb has gone off. The income of the elite is 53 times that of the bottom tier. The wealth gap in New York now resembles a miniature developing nation, shattering all illusions of equality. And here is the fatal twist for this metropolis. While the poor desperately abandon everything to flee, global tycoons are flocking in on private jets to settle down. Step outside and you bump into a millionaire. It's a density so thick it's suffocating. Brush Los Angeles or Chicago aside, New York arrogantly holds the crown as the city with the highest concentration of billionaires on the planet. They are filtering the blood of this city, turning it into an exclusive fortress for the ultra. Cutting across New York's 5 boroughs, a massive fault line appears. For outer boroughs are drowning in population loss, but ironically, the billion-dollar heart of Manhattan is welcoming a massive influx. One city, two cruel fates. All attempts to patch things up are now just castles in the sand. The core is frozen in a deadlock, helplessly watching the population charts slide out of control. From its position as America's #1, New York bitterly wears the crown of the king of population loss for years on end. A mismatched industrial structure, cannibalistic living costs, geographic polarization, and misguided policies, those four blades have collectively ended a golden past. The portrait of New York today is the most brutal wake-up call in the evolution of a megacity. Glamorous opportunities always silently exact their price, sometimes costing the livelihood of an entire generation of residents.